London is a city that has experienced everything from Roman conquests to the bombings of World War II, from the plague to Olympic triumphs. Its docks welcomed the gold of the New World, and its streets saw the birth of revolutionary ideas. The Great Fire of 1666 destroyed the city, but from the ashes rose a new London, grandiose, bold, ready to change the world. It's a place where skyscraper towers neighbor ancient Roman walls, and every street holds the secrets of monarchs, poets, and revolutionaries. London is a history that is not just written, but carved in its stones and the hearts of its people. Do you want to know how this city became a world center of culture and power? Immerse yourself in a fascinating journey through the ages, where every event is intrigue, drama, and inspiration. London's history begins long before its name appeared on maps. On the banks of the River Thames, among the marshes and forests, life flourished thousands of years ago. Prehistoric London was not a city, but it was the stage for the first chapters of human history, written by the hands of hunters and gatherers exploring these lands. The River Thames, with its meandering banks and rich ecosystem, became the heart of this life, a source of food, water, and shelter. The first humans appeared in this region about 450,000 years ago, during the Paleolithic era. Back then, Britain had a very different climate, with ice ages alternating with warm periods between ice ages. It was a harsh struggle for survival, and people found everything they needed here. Stone tools discovered by archaeologists speak of the skill of those who lived here. They not only hunted mammoths and reindeer, but also created tools that allowed them to process hides, build primitive dwellings, and defend themselves from predators. In the Neolithic period, around 4000 BC, there was a significant leap in the development of human communities. People began to develop agriculture. Cereals and vegetables were first grown on the banks of the Thames, and domesticated animals provided milk, meat, and wool. Permanent settlements appeared. These early communities built long wooden houses around which the first fields grew. Attitudes towards nature were changing. People were no longer just using its resources, they were beginning to manage it. The first attempts at interaction between different tribes also date back to this time. The banks of the Thames served not only as a home, but also as a road connecting different regions. Trade flourished on these shores. Through the exchange of stone, pottery, and jewelry, new social ties were formed. Evidence of this interaction can be found in archaeological excavations, from jewelry to implements made from materials not found in these parts. The Bronze Age, which began around 2500 BC, was a time of tremendous change. Metallurgy changed the world. Bronze tools and weapons were superior to stone ones, making agriculture more efficient and warfare more destructive. The first wooden bridges appeared on the banks of the Thames, allowing the river to be crossed and trade to expand. Woodland gave way to arable land, and the region's population grew. Archaeological discoveries, such as the remains of wooden pilings, show that even then, people were already building stable structures on the water. One of the most interesting examples of this period was a structure known as a house on stilts, found in modern-day southern England. It shows how people adapted to the frequent flooding of the Thames. These structures demonstrate the engineering skills and ancestors' ability to anticipate natural hazards. With the arrival of the Iron Age, around 800 BC, life on the banks of the Thames took on new forms. Iron, a stronger and more readily available material, replaced bronze. People began to create sophisticated tools and weapons, leading to a flourishing of agriculture and military might. Fortified settlements, hill forts, sprang up at higher elevations, providing protection from hostile tribes. These forts, such as Captain Hill or Holborn Hill, became the centers of new communities, protected and economically active. But the lives of these people were not limited to survival. Culture and rituals played an important part in their world. Archaeologists have found the remains of mounds and shrines where the ancient Thames people worshipped their gods. One such place is a cultic structure found in West London. It held offerings, pottery, jewelry, and sometimes even human remains, testifying to elaborate rituals. At the end of the prehistoric period, several hundred years before the Roman conquest, the banks of the Thames were already inhabited by tribes capable of a high level of organization. One of the most famous tribes of the region was the Trinavants. They were a people who traded extensively with continental Europe, importing wine, jewelry, and weapons. Their main settlements were probably located where central London is now. The year 43 AD was a momentous one for the British Isles. The Roman Empire, eager to expand its borders, sent its legions to conquer Britain. It was not just a military campaign. It was the beginning of an era that would change the face of this land forever. Under the leadership of the Emperor Claudius, the Romans invaded the island, and soon, on the banks of the Thames, a city began to take shape that was named Londinium. Londinium was established as a strategic outpost. Its location was not chosen by chance. The River Thames offered easy access for ships, its natural curves provided protection, and the surrounding land was fertile enough to supply the growing population. The river also connected the city to other regions of Britain, as well as continental Europe, making Londinium an ideal center for trade and military logistics. From the beginning, Londinium was intended to be more than just a military base. The Romans began construction with bridges and roads, the very arteries needed to control the territory. The first wooden bridge across the Thames became a symbol of Roman engineering genius, connecting the two banks of the river and allowing armies and traders to move quickly through the region. This bridge not only connected north and south, but also became an economic engine, opening up new routes for trade. The city itself grew rapidly. Within a few years after its foundation, Londinium became an important trading center. Ships loaded with goods arrived from Gaul, Spain, and even North Africa. Wine, olive oil, ceramics, and textiles were imported into Londinium. Metals were exported from Britain, especially tin and iron, which were highly valued in the markets of Rome. The city became a place where different cultures and civilizations intersected. Romans, local Britons, and traders and mercenaries from all corners of the empire. To protect this pearl of commerce, the Romans began to build fortifications. The key element was the walls that surrounded the city at the beginning of the 2nd century AD. These massive structures made of stone and brick were not only a barrier against enemies, but also a symbol of Roman power. Along the walls were towers and gates to control access to the city. Some fragments of these walls remain today, reminding us how the Romans shaped London. The Roman architecture of Londinium reflected the grandeur of the empire. The Forum and Basilica, built in the center of the city, became its heart. The Forum was a place for meetings, trade, and public events. The Basilica served as the administrative center where legal and economic matters were settled. The city's Thermae, decorated with mosaics and statues, provided not only a place for recreation, but also demonstrated the level of comfort available to Roman citizens. One of the most impressive achievements of the Romans was the construction of the amphitheater. This grandiose complex could hold thousands of spectators and served as a place for gladiatorial fights, theatrical performances, and other spectacles. The Londinium Amphitheater was more than just a place of entertainment. It was a center of social life where Romans and locals could come together, immersing themselves in the culture of the empire. Aqueducts and sewage systems were an equally important part of city life. The Romans brought with them advanced engineering technology that provided the city with clean water and efficient sewage disposal. This not only improved the quality of life for the inhabitants of Londinium, but also reduced the risk of epidemics, which was rare for cities of that era. However, life in Londinium was not only luxurious. Roman London did not escape social and economic strife. Most of the population lived in modest houses made of wood and clay. These houses were cramped and vulnerable to fires that often destroyed entire neighborhoods. But even in such conditions, The townspeople found joy. The markets were bustling with life. The taverns were filled with laughter, and the shrines brought comfort and hope. Londinium became not only an economic, but also a cultural center. Roman religion, literature, art penetrated into the life of local residents, creating a unique fusion of traditions. At the same time, the Romans also respected the culture of the Britons, which led to a kind of cultural synthesis. Temples dedicated to the Roman gods neighbored with shrines honored by local tribes, and Roman festivals gradually merged with local customs. Roman London became a symbol of progress, power, and adaptability. In a few decades, it transformed from a small military camp to a thriving city linking Britain to the heart of the empire. Its roads, bridges, forums, and walls became not just structures, but symbols of a new order that encompassed the entire known world. Londinium became an integral part of the Roman Empire and laid the foundations for London to become one of the greatest cities in history. By the beginning of the 3rd century, Londinium shone with grandeur, its streets buzzing with commerce and its forums filled with orators' speeches. But this splendor hid the first cracks, which became more and more evident with each decade. The decline of Roman London developed gradually, but its causes and consequences were devastating not only for the city, but for the whole of Britain. The Roman Empire, which had spread its influence over vast territories, was by this time beginning to experience difficulties related to the size of its possessions. Governance of the provinces was becoming more and more complex, and maintaining order required enormous resources. Britain, on the fringes of the empire, was gradually turning from an important outpost into an onerous problem. Already at the end of the 2nd century, the Romans began to reduce their presence on the island. This could not but affect Londinium, which, as a commercial and administrative center, witnessed growing instability. One of the key reasons for the decline of Londinium was the depletion of the economy. Roman Britain had initially prospered from the trade in metals, agricultural products, and handicrafts. However, by the 3rd century, these resources began to dry up. The Roman economy, which had depended on a constant flow of wealth from new territories, began to face shortages. The gradual decline of tin and iron mining in Britain was undermining the basis of trade. The city, which had previously been a bustling marketplace, began to experience economic decline. During this period, raids by barbarian tribes became more frequent. The Saxons and other tribes previously confined to the sea now used sophisticated ships to attack the coasts of Britain. Londinium, located on the river, became vulnerable to these threats. Initially, the Romans tried to defend their possessions by fortifying the city walls and increasing the number of garrisons. However, it soon became clear that there were not enough resources to withstand the growing pressure. The barbarians seized small settlements around the city, destroying the supply chain and weakening Londinium's position. In addition to external threats, internal problems increased. Political strife in the Roman Empire increasingly affected its provinces. In 286, taking advantage of the chaos, the Roman commander Carausius declared himself Emperor of Britain. Londinium temporarily became part of his independent state. This period was short, but it was a symbol of how weak Rome's influence over Britain had become. After the assassination of Carausius, the situation in the city deteriorated further. Londinium lost its status as a stable center, and its inhabitants increasingly felt isolated from central authority. Natural disasters also aggravated the situation. Climatic changes that began in the 3rd century made farming less productive. Cold winters and rainy summers reduced harvests, leading to famine. The Thames, which had previously been the most important transportation route, was becoming less reliable due to flooding and shoaling. These developments undermined the economy of the city, which became increasingly dependent on outside supplies. In the 4th century, the Roman Empire split into eastern and western parts. Britain, ruled by the Western Empire, became even more isolated. Londinium, once the administrative center of the region, began to lose its importance. The empire moved the center of British administration to Eberach, modern York. which was closer to the northern borders where the main military operations took place. This decision deprived Londinium of much of its status and resources. Gradually, it became apparent to the city's elite and administration that Rome could no longer provide security and prosperity for Britain. The streets of Londinium began to undergo changes that symbolized its decline. The city forums, previously filled with merchants and citizens, emptied out. The craft shops were closing, and the markets were increasingly empty. The stone houses, built with care and luxury, began to deteriorate. Many of them became ruins, and their rubble was used by the inhabitants to build simpler dwellings. The Roman roads that connected the city to other regions began to deteriorate from lack of proper maintenance. The most dramatic moment in the history of Londinium was the news that the Roman Empire would no longer defend Britain. In 410, Emperor Honorius sent a message to the British communities declaring that they must look after their own defense. This marked the official end of Roman rule. Londinium, left without garrisons or supplies, was virtually abandoned. The city walls that once protected against barbarians now served as shelter for small groups of citizens trying to survive amidst the chaos. Most of the population had left Londinium, preferring the safety of the countryside. Some remained, turning the city into a mixture of ruins and random settlements. Baths, amphitheaters, and forums all became grim reminders of former greatness. However, the Roman legacy did not disappear completely. The walls and roads built by the Romans continued to serve the next generations. Stones that had once been part of forums and temples were used to build new buildings. The Thames remained an important artery, and Roman cultural traditions and engineering knowledge were passed on from generation to generation. The departure of the Romans was the end of one era and the beginning of another. Londinium was devastated, but it did not disappear. Its ruins became the basis for a future rebirth, and its Roman legacy the foundation for a new history that would soon begin to unfold on these shores. London, as we know it today, began its journey through darkness and chaos to rise again in the future. When the Romans left Britain, civilization itself seemed to have gone with them. Londinium, once a prosperous city with strong stone walls, amphitheaters, and thermae, was abandoned. Its streets emptied, its houses crumbled, and nature began to take back what once belonged to it. The Thames, which had been the lifeblood of the city for centuries, continued to flow, but its banks were no longer filled with the clamor of markets and crowds. The city was reduced to ruins, but not gone forever. The Anglo-Saxon period was a time of new beginnings. In the first centuries after the Romans left, Britain was plunged into chaos. Its territory was divided between many small kingdoms that fought each other for power and resources. London, which had lost its Roman glory, remained in the shadow of these conflicts. However, its strategic position on the river that connected the interior to the sea provided it with a chance for revival. The Anglo-Saxons, who came to Britain from Northern Europe, did not immediately pay attention to the old Londinium, but gradually realized its importance. Initially, the Anglo-Saxons settled along the banks of the Thames, avoiding the Roman walls, which seemed to them a symbol of an alien culture. The first Anglo-Saxon villages appeared on the south bank of the river. The Thames was ideal for fishing and shipping, and the fertile land around it for farming. Gradually, the new settlers began to rebuild Londinium, but not in its former form. The town adapted to the new conditions, taking on an Anglo-Saxon appearance. Wooden houses, simple workshops, and small market squares began to fill the space inside the old Roman walls. Trade played a key role in the city's recovery. Despite the political chaos, England remained part of international trade routes. London became a meeting place for merchants from different parts of Europe. Wool, honey, fish, cloth, and metals were traded here. The River Thames was an important transportation route that connected London to other cities and villages. The city's market squares began to revitalize, and with them, the city itself. Rebuilding was slow but steady. Stone buildings were replaced by wooden ones, streets were cleaned and ship berths were built along the riverbanks. With the restoration of trade, the restoration of London's political importance also began. At that time, England consisted of several kingdoms, and each of them sought to control this strategically important city. Initially, London was under the influence of the Mercian kings, but by the 9th century, the situation began to change. The kings of Wessex, such as Alfred the Great, realized that control of London meant control of the entire southern part of England. Alfred the Great played a key role in the revitalization of London. His reign was a turning point in the city's Anglo-Saxon history. After defeating the Vikings at the Battle of Edington in 878, Alfred undertook sweeping reforms that affected London. He not only rebuilt the walls of the Roman Londinium, but also fortified them, turning the city into a powerful fortress. This decision was the basis for the city's rebirth as a political and military center. London once again became a safe place where people from the surrounding villages flocked to escape Vikings and other threats. Alfred's reforms were not limited to defense. He sought to make London a cultural and administrative center. Churches and monasteries began to appear in the city, which became centers of education and spiritual life. It was during this period that the foundations of the Anglo-Saxon system of government began to form, where royal power was combined with the influence of local councils. London became a place where meetings were held to decide key issues affecting not only the city itself, but the whole of England. However, London in the Anglo-Saxon period was not only a symbol of power and authority, but also a place of cultural revival. With the emergence of churches, the active spread of Christianity began. London's monasteries became centers of manuscript transcription, learning, and spiritual enlightenment. These institutions not only strengthened religious influence, but also served as a tool for consolidating power. Christianity became a link between the disparate tribes, and London became a symbol of this unity. Despite its achievements, Anglo-Saxon London faced many challenges. Viking attacks remained a constant threat. The city was besieged and ravaged several times, but recovered each time. The people of London learned to live with the instability by fortifying their homes, building shelters, and constantly improving defenses. This spirit of resistance, established in the Anglo-Saxon period, became a key feature of the city's character. By the end of the Anglo-Saxon era, London had become a city that began to resemble its Roman glory again, but now with an Anglo-Saxon character. Its walls were stronger, its markets busier, and its influence stronger. The city became a center that attracted not only merchants and artisans, but also politicians, spiritual leaders, and military leaders. No longer just a dot on the map, it became the heart of England, where ideas that would change its future were born. The Anglo-Saxon period laid the foundation for what London would become in the following centuries. It was a period when the city was reborn, rebuilding from ruins and becoming a symbol of resilience, strength, and progress. The Thames, which had seen Roman triumphs, now witnessed new hopes and achievements. London had come alive again, and its new chapter was just beginning. The Norman conquest in 1066 ushered in a new era for London. With the rise of William the Conqueror, the city entered a period of significant transformation that changed its face and significance forever. The conquest was not just a military victory. It brought with it a new system of government, architectural advances, and cultural changes that laid the foundation for London's future as a center of power and commerce. After winning the Battle of Hastings, William the Conqueror sought to exert his power over the conquered lands. London, as the most important and most vital city in England, became a key element in this strategy. The city, which by this time already possessed strong defensive walls and strategic positions to deal with the subject, could not be ignored. However, despite the defeat of the Anglo-Saxon forces, Londoners were not about to surrender without fear. The city resisted, aware of its role as the center of Anglo-Saxon court and trade. William realized that he needed not just to conquer London, but to consolidate his power over it in order to turn it into the backbone of his rule. He chose this policy of intimidation and diplomacy. After capturing the city, he took steps to create a new symbol of Norman power, the White Tower, the first building of the tower. This massive stone building was more than just a fortress. It towered over London, essentially the embodiment of Norman power, leaving no doubt as to who now ruled the land. The tower became the centerpiece of the Norman strategy of governance. Its construction was truly grandiose for the time. Using stone imported from Normandy and engineering solutions not previously common in England made the White Tower unique. Its massive walls, reaching nearly 4 meters thick, and crenellated towers inspired fear and respect. But its importance was not limited to military constraints. The tower became a royal residence, arsenal, and treasure house. It was both the center of power and a symbol of its steadfastness. However, ruling London required not only architectural symbols, but also changes in social and political life. William brought with him a new system of feudal government that changed the old Anglo-Saxon orders. Land was redistributed in favor of Norman barons, which strengthened the king's control over the region. London was no exception. New landowners loyal to William played their part in bringing stability to the city. Despite the sweeping changes, William did not seek to completely destroy Anglo-Saxon traditions. He recognized that London was not only a strategic site, but also a living city with a tradition of self-government. To win the support of the local population, he reaffirmed a number of Londoners' privileges, including the right to internal autonomy and free trade. This allowed the citizens to retain a degree of autonomy, which in most cases contributed to the development of the city. With the establishment of Norman rule, London began to change not only politically, but also culturally. The city became a center of attraction for traders, craftsmen, and architects from continental Europe. This led to changes in the appearance of the city. Stone buildings, bridges, and churches built in the Norman style became symbols of the new era. London became a place where the traditions of the Anglo-Saxons and the innovations brought by the Normans changed. The Thames, which had always been the heart of the city, played a key role in these changes. Under Norman rule, the river became an even more important transportation artery, connecting London to Europe and other regions of England. Cargo ships brought goods, including wine, yarn, cloth, and metals on a daily basis. The Port of London became one of the busiest in Europe, and its importance only grew. Merchants from Flanders, France, and Germany sought to trade here, which turned the city into an international economic center. William the Conqueror also introduced administrative reforms that strengthened the administration of the city. He held the position of sheriffs, representatives of the royal family, responsible for maintaining order and collecting taxes. The sheriffs enforced the laws and controlled the financial flows to the royal execution. These reforms made London not only the political, but also the administrative center of England. The Norman conquest not only changed London, but also laid the foundation for its future growth. Under William's leadership, the city became a symbol of a new order in which power, culture, and economy merged into a single structure. The White Tower that towered over London reminded anyone entering the city that it was part of a wider expansion of empire. However, this did not indicate that London had completely lost its identity. On the contrary, its inhabitants learned to adapt to new conditions, preserving their traditions and bringing them into the new period. These changes were just the beginning of new stages in the city's history. London continued to grow, becoming a center of trade and culture that soon became known throughout Europe. The tower, standing on the banks of the Thames, saw everything. New ships bringing goods from across the sea, the bustling markets, and the grand processions of kings. The city had entered an era of prosperity, but even greater challenges and achievements lay ahead. Medieval London, which consolidated its role as a political center after the Norman conquest, quickly became the economic heart of England. Its geographical position on the banks of the Thames made it a hub for trade, and a growing network of roads connected it to the country's regions. But London's prosperity during this period was unimaginable without the merchants, craftsmen, and guilds, key forces that shaped its appearance and character. Trade became the life of London. The Thames, wide and deep, continued to allow large ships to dock right at the city's docks. From continental Europe came wines, cloth, spices, and weapons. From England, wool, grain, and metals were being shipped in return. London's harbor buzzed with life as porters toiled, officials checked goods, and the marketplace boomed with fierce haggling. The city squares were filled with stalls where you could buy everything from precious silks to freshly caught fish. Markets became centers of social life, where people not only transacted business, but also made innovations, discussed politics, and built alliances. Of particular importance was the trade in wool, which in the Middle Ages became England's main export commodity. English wool was famous for its quality, and buyers from Flanders, Italy, and other parts of Europe sought to obtain it for the production of fabrics. The merchant houses that sprang up in London became bases for deals and bargains. The wealth copied through wool exports made London even more influential on the international stage. The artisans working in London played no small part in the prosperity of the city. Carpenters, blacksmiths, bakers, tailors, their workshops were the lifeblood of the city's economy. Each artisan specialized in a particular product, from metalwork to the exquisite fabrics that adorned London's wealthy homes and the courts of kings. Their labor created not only goods for mass consumption, but also items sought after by the public. London artisans took pride in their craftsmanship, and their products became a symbol of quality. Meanwhile, to protect their interests, artisans and merchants began to organize themselves into guilds. These organizations played a huge role in the economic and social life of the city. Guilds regulated standards of production, controlled the quality of goods, trained new craftsmen, and protected their employees from competitors. They were not only professional associations, but also an important part of the city government. Many guilds, such as the Fishmongers' Guild or the Clothiers' Guild, had their own buildings and even churches where respect and esteem were shown. Guilds have become the governing structure of the city. Londoners united in these organizations provided access to power and influence. Many guild leaders became aldermen, members of the city council, or lord mayors. City officials worked closely with the guilds to ensure the order and beautification of London. This interaction created a system of governance in which key players directly influenced decisions that determined the fate of the city. This system attracted more and more people to London. Merchants came from all over Europe, and sometimes from farther afield. Jewish merchants, for example, played a role in the city's financial system until their expulsion at the end of the 13th century. Craftsmen from France, Germany, and Flanders brought their traditions, enriching London's cultural and economic landscape. The city became increasingly cosmopolitan, and this multiculturalism only strengthened its position as a major commercial center. London didn't just live trade, it breathed it. Its rhythm changed with events and the care of the ships, the noise in the markets, and the negotiations in the trading houses. This prosperity, however, came with a price. The overcrowding caused by the influx of people created many social and infrastructural problems. The narrow streets of the city were overcrowded, and sanitary conditions left much to be desired. Epidemics and fires often ravaged the city, causing serious damage to its population and economy. Despite this, London rebounded each time, growing stronger and richer. Guilds, in turn, became not just protectors of economic interests, but educators of urban character. They promoted order, looked after the welfare of their citizens, and even played a role in urban culture. Guilds organized festive processions, staged theatrical performances and events that united citizens and strengthened their sense of community. By the 13th century, London had become one of the most important cities in Europe. Its wealth influenced and attracted not only merchants, but also kings who were in its accounting part of his kingdom. But London was more than just a city. It was a living organism where trade and craft intertwined with culture and politics, creating a unique world where every stone in the sidewalk held the memory of transactions, alliances, and ambitions. The 14th century was a severe test for London. A city that had prospered from trade, crafts, and a growing population faced crises that not only shook it to its foundations, but also shaped its future. Among these events, the Black Death and the Great Peasants' Revolt became true symbols of the age, reflecting not only the horrors, but also the power of the human spirit to survive and change. The Black Death came to England in 1348, seizing the country in its mortal embrace. London, as an independent city and trading center, became its epicenter. Ships arriving at the port brought not only goods, but disease spread by blogs on rats. The plague, with its swift and merciless period, claimed the lives of thousands of people in the days red. There was chaos and panic in the streets. Those who could fled the city, but most, without means or strength, fled. London streets were transformed into grim scenes of misery. The bodies of the dead lay everywhere as funerals were not observed for death. Mass graves became an everyday reality, and the stench of disease filled the air. Families realized that neighborhood ties had broken down, and social norms were eroding under the onslaught of insurance. People sought solace in religion, but even the church proved powerless in the face of large-scale disasters. Priests, a dangerous life, continued to fulfill their duties, but they too were dying by the thousands. By the time the epidemic ended, around 1351, the population of London had been cut almost in half. The effects were felt around the world. A ruined economy, abandoned houses and fields, and deserted streets all created an atmosphere of despair. However, as has often been the case in London's history, the crisis was the impetus for change. The shrinking population led to a severe labor shortage, giving those who survived the opportunity to demand more training in labor. This was the beginning of a social change that laid the foundations for the destruction of the feudal system. The plague changed urban culture as well. The realization of the fragility of life led people to appreciate the present more. This caused a rise in the popularity of art, literature, and especially rituals to help cope with the trauma. London began to recover, but the shadow of the epidemic remained for many years, a reminder of how fragile human life is and how important it is to be prepared for the challenges of fate. A few events after Black's death, London was once again the scene of upheaval. In 1381, the city found itself at the epicenter of the Great Peasants' Revolt. Its causes were rooted in the effects of the plague: economic decline, rising taxes, and economic factors increasing tensions in society. The new tax policies introduced by Richard II's government caused a storm of resentment. For the peasants and the poor, it was the last straw. Crowds began moving out of the atmosphere, heading toward London. Led by Wat Tyler, thousands of peasants entered the city, destroying the homes of the rich, setting fire to buildings, and killing those in authority. They freed the closed from the tower and secured an audience with the young king. Richard II, then only 14 years old, met with the rebels at Smithfield Fields. Tyler made demands that honored abolition of serfdom, abatement, and conformity before the law. The negotiations were the culmination of the rebellion, but their outcome was tragic. Tyler was killed and the rebellion was brutally put down. The royal army quickly regained control of London, and the rebel leaders were executed. However, despite the defeat, the event left a deep mark. It showed that the lower strata of society could mount a serious resistance and force reform. After the suppression of the rebellion, London began rebuilding again. City officials focused on consolidating order and restoring the economy. Trade resumed, craft shops reopened, and the world began to grow. Londoners who had survived both crises developed resilience and adaptability. The city changed, but did not lose its energy and drive to develop. These events were a transitional moment in London's history. In this case, despite the upheaval, the city learned not only how to survive, but also how to renew itself. Plague and rebellions brought about changes that laid the foundations for future prosperity. London became a city where the struggle for survival went hand in hand with cultural and economic development. By the end of the 14th century, London, exhausted but unruffled, was preparing for a new era. A time of change was ahead of it when the Tudor and Stuart chains would come to the throne. London would become not only a political and economic center, but also an arena of great discoveries, architectural wonders, and cultural color. The next chapter unfolds this fascinating story of the rebirth and transformation of a city that has become a symbol of English power and inspiration to the world. The Tudor era was a time when London became not only the political and economic center of England, but also an important player on the international stage. It was a period when royal power was consolidated, trade expanded, and the city's cultural life flourished, making London one of the most dynamic cities in Europe. The rise of the Tudors and their connection to London began with Henry VII, who came to power in 1485, ending the long and destructive wars of the Scarlet and White Rose. Henry Tudor's victory at the Battle of Bosworth brought a new dynasty to the English throne, and his reign was a period of consolidation of power. Henry VII understood the importance of London as a political and economic center, and from the first years of his reign, began to actively strengthen its role in the life of the country. The capital was used not only for administrative needs, but also to connect with other regions, especially with trading partners. Henry VII realized that he needed to build a strong economy to ensure stability on the throne, and London became a key element in this process. Henry promoted the expansion of trade and improved infrastructure, which strengthened the financial foundation of the kingdom. London became an important trading hub that connected England to Europe, as well as to new markets in the New World. It was a city where merchants, artisans flourished, and where major trade deals could be made by the day. At this time, wealthy neighborhoods began to grow in London, where a new class, the bourgeoisie, lived and became an important element of city life. Cities like the capital were changing in their social structures, and London became a symbol of a booming economy. Under Henry VII, the foundations were laid for what would become one of the world's most powerful trading empires in the future. The nation's capital was strengthened, its borders were expanded, and its urban infrastructure was improved. However, the real turning point for London was the reign of Henry VIII, who came to power in 1509. His reign was marked not only by personal tragedies and political intrigue, but also by a historical event that had a profound effect on the entire country, the Reformation. Henry VIII, determined to break with the Catholic Church, initiated the establishment of the Church of England. This was not only a religious, but also a political event that radically changed the life of London and the whole of England. Henry VIII became the head of the new church, and the break with Rome led to the closure of the monasteries, which had previously been the most important centers of spiritual and social life. With the closure of the monasteries, London underwent significant changes. The lands of the monasteries, which had previously been sources of income and influence for the church, were transferred to the crown and new owners. This created both economic opportunity and social tension. The closure of the monasteries not only disrupted the religious structure, but also affected the urban landscape. Many monasteries that had been an important part of the city's architecture were destroyed or repurposed for new purposes. This changed the face of London, giving the city a new, more secular appearance, where power and wealth were epitomized not only by church buildings, but also by the new royal palaces and residences. The Reformation undoubtedly had a great impact on the social structure of London. Against the background of the decline of the monasteries, new cultural and social institutions began to develop in the city. Craft shops, guilds, and new commercial structures became increasingly important, and London gradually became the center not only of religious life, but also of commerce, production, and finance. London also became an important center of maritime trade and expansion, which played a key role in its development during this period. Henry VIII, who strongly supported the English Navy, realized the importance of sea power in strengthening the kingdom and expanding England's influence. The capital began to be used as the main base for English expeditions, and the Port of London became the center from which ships exploring new lands and opening new trade routes departed. As the Navy grew, London became not only a trading center, but also an important military hub. Navigators such as Francis Drake and Hawke, who became England's heroes through their long-distance expeditions, occupy a special place in the history of London during this period. Drake, who became the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, brought to London not only fame, but also wealth from new trade routes. The Port of London became a vital link in the network of international trade. Goods arrived from Spain, France, India, Africa, and the New World. Along the Thames, new warehouses and stores began to be built, and the sea became not only a link to other parts of the world, but also a symbol of England's growing power. With the growth of maritime trade, London became a place for not only commerce, but also culture to flourish. Theater, literature, and the arts became important elements of city life. During the reign of Elizabeth I in London, experienced its heyday theater world, which became an important part of the cultural life of England. Shakespeare, as a major figure of English dramaturgy, created his greatest works in London. The Globe Theatre, built in 1599, became a symbol not only of the cultural blossoming of London, but also of England as a whole. Spectacles in the theatre attracted thousands of people, regardless of their social status, and the theatres themselves became important centers not only for entertainment, but also for discussion of political and social topics. Tudor London was a city in which not only politics, economics, and religion, but also culture flourished, laying the foundation for future successes. This city, despite its difficulties and turmoil, grew ever stronger and became the most important center for the entire English kingdom. Reformation and maritime expansion, cultural flourishing and power struggles, all these events created an image of London as a city that stepped boldly into a new, greater future. The English Civil War, 1642 to 1651, was one of the most dramatic and destructive periods in London's history. The era of tumultuous political and social change that preceded this conflict caused a deep divide between the monarchy of Charles I and Parliament, which eventually led to open civil war that divided the country into two opposing camps. London became not only the scene of brutal fighting, but also the epicenter of revolutionary ideas actively supporting the parliamentary army. The background to the conflict between the king and Parliament is rooted in long years of political and social tensions. From the very beginning of Charles I's reign, in 1625, the monarch faced difficulties in governing the country. His policies could be characterized as a desire to strengthen royal power at the expense of weakening Parliament. One of the most striking manifestations of his authoritarian aspirations was his demand for power over Parliament and his attempts to rule without it, which provoked protests among the aristocracy and merchants who sought to retain influence over the government. Charles I tried to rule without Parliament, collecting money through unreasonable taxes and receipts, which fostered discontent among the bourgeoisie and a minority of parliamentary circles. In addition, religious disputes became key to the conflict. Charles supported the Anglican Church, which was rejected by a part of the population committed to the Puritan movement, protesting against its Catholic features. These ideological differences led to an escalation of the political struggle, which eventually culminated in civil war. London, as the main commercial and cultural center of England, became a hotbed of resistance to the monarchy. The capital was populated by liberal and reformist elements of society, the bourgeoisie, artisans, and intellectuals, for whom the protest against royal power became an expression of the desire for political freedom and social justice. the city became a refuge for the parliamentary opposition, and every year, the number of those who supported the ideas of parliamentary freedom increased. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1642, London found itself at the center of hostilities. Sieges and street battles became part of everyday life. The realization that the outcome of the war depended on control of the capital determined the strategic importance of London to both sides of the conflict. While Charles I was in search of allies in the north and west of England, Parliament, with the support of the citizens, controlled London, turning it into a fortified center of confrontation. The war in London was not limited to military action. The city's economy was in decline. Crumbling trade routes, sieges, and the closure of markets led to a decline in trade and increased poverty among residents. The situation worsened over time. The invasion of royalist troops and Parliament's response in the form of sieges and attacks caused social instability. At the same time, life in the city continued, but it became a daily struggle for survival. Nevertheless, London remained an important stronghold for the parliamentary army. Londoners actively supported the revolutionary forces by providing resources and recruits for Oliver Cromwell's army. In this context, the city becomes not just a military center, but also a place of active political struggle. Many Londoners volunteered to join the parliamentary forces and also supported the idea of establishing a republic. One of the most dramatic moments of the Civil War was the trial and execution of King Charles I in 1649. This move was a historic turning point that changed the course of English history forever. The execution of the king was seen as a victory for the parliamentary army and a vindication of the power of the people. London witnessed this historic denouement. The public execution of Charles I in the square in front of Windsor Palace was an incredible and, for many, shocking event that further strengthened revolutionary sentiment among the citizens. London became a symbol of the victory of the revolution, but also a place where the tension between the old monarchy and the new order was palpable. The revolution did not bring total peace, and social divisions continued even after the fall of the king. The new republic established by Oliver Cromwell brought London to the forefront of the country's political life. However, Cromwell's rule, despite its populist rhetoric, was far from the ideals of freedom and equality. The Republic, for all its political openness, was a tightly controlled system, and the power of the Puritans became more and more authoritarian with each passing year. The influence of the Puritans on London was significant. In an attempt to create a cleaner society, Cromwell and his supporters began to suppress all forms of indecent entertainment. Theater, literature, public festivities, and celebrations were strictly controlled. Puritan authorities closed theaters, banned plays that might raise moral doubts, and suppressed all entertainment, including popular festivals and mass events. This created an atmosphere of oppression in which, despite theoretical freedom, real life became increasingly austere and obscurantist. But despite the ideological contradictions, London, as before, remained the center of political activity and intellectual debate. The city was not only a place of warfare, but also an arena for the struggle of ideas. The confrontation between Parliament and royal power continued to be the most important topic for discussions, literary, and philosophical currents. London became not only a place where the struggle for political power unfolded, but also a center of thought that shaped the future of England. The Great Disaster that shook London in 1666 was one of the most devastating and momentous events in the city's history. The fire, which began on the night of September 2nd to 3rd, quickly engulfed most of the city, destroying more than 3/4 of London, including homes, churches, and public buildings. This cataclysmic event not only caused massive destruction, but also became a turning point in the city's history, determining its future development for many decades to come. The causes of the Great Fire remain a matter of debate, but its outbreak was the logical consequence of many factors. In London at that time, the buildings were mostly wooden, and the streets were cramped and crowded. This created ideal conditions for the fire to spread. Starting in a baker's house in Pudding Lane, the blaze quickly engulfed nearby buildings, exacerbated by a dry summer and strong winds. Over the course of 4 days, the fire destroyed more than 13,000 homes, 87 churches, including the famous St. Paul's Church, and numerous public and private buildings. Many commercial houses, warehouses, and workshops were also among those lost, causing great damage to the city's economy. The social and economic consequences of the fire were catastrophic. Thousands of people were rendered homeless. Many lost all their property. For a city that had already experienced economic hardship after the Civil War and Revolution, it was the final blow. The reconstruction required a huge effort on the part of both the Crown and the population itself. The losses were not only material. The fire destroyed the usual way of life, wiped entire neighborhoods off the map, leaving the city in ruins and requiring reconstruction that would change the face of London forever. One of the major factors in the rebuilding of London was the architectural revival that began immediately after the flames of the fire died down. Christopher Wren, a prominent English architect, was appointed by King Charles II to rebuild the devastated capital. Wren proposed an ambitious plan that included not only the rebuilding of the destroyed buildings, but also a complete rethinking of the urban fabric. He was one of the first architects to fully recognize the need to use stone in construction, which would have prevented a repeat of the tragedy. The rebuilding of the city under his leadership became a landmark moment in the architecture of not only London, but also the whole of England. Wren's most important and notable project was St. Paul's Cathedral, the symbol of the New London. This grandiose church, whose construction began in 1675, became not only a place of worship, but also a symbol of the city's rebirth after the Great Destruction. Completed in 1711, St. Paul's Cathedral, with its majestic dome and unique architecture, embodied a renewed London, rebuilt with respect for tradition and a vision for the future. With its construction, Wren not only demonstrated architectural grandeur, but also emphasized the city's desire to rebuild after it was destroyed overnight. But rebuilding London was not just about individual buildings. Wren proposed new principles of urban planning that included widening streets, improving urban infrastructure, and creating new squares. Wren proposed wider and straighter streets that would provide better ventilation and access to water. On top of this, a number of new safety standards were adopted, such as building houses out of brick and stone, which greatly improved the strength of buildings and their resistance to fire. This transition from wooden structures to stone buildings changed not only the architectural style of the city, but also the structure of its economic life, as new construction technologies required large investments and attracted new craftsmen and laborers. After the Great Fire, London became not only safer, but also more functional. The revival of trade and crafts, the restoration of trade routes and markets contributed to the rapid economic recovery of the city. By the early 18th century, London had already returned to its status as Europe's largest commercial center. Restored markets, new warehouses, marketplaces, and workshops were once again meeting places for merchants and artisans, which led to the growth not only of the city, but also of its prosperity. London once again became a magnet for businessmen, artists, and explorers, which also strengthened its influence on the international stage. However, the reconstruction of London was not without social changes. After the fire, land was redistributed, and many of the city's older residents lost their homes while new families settled in rebuilt neighborhoods. This led to growing social stratification, and the city's citizens faced new problems related to housing and labor resources. But this process also hid opportunities. London became a center of attraction for new segments of the population, including professionals and workers, which led to changes in the social structure of the city. All these changes gradually influenced social relations, creating a new urban landscape and new social realities. The rebuilt London became the basis for further cultural and scientific growth, leading to the formation of a city that would become the center of the Enlightenment in the 18th century. London's scientists, philosophers and writers began to put forward new ideas that would soon change the worldviews of generations. With the new order and restored trade routes, London became a place where not only commercial interests, but also cultural, scientific, and philosophical ideas intersected. It was the foundation for the birth of the changes that would lead to the Great Revolution and the birth of the modern world. The Stuart era, which left an indelible mark on London's history, came to an end in the early 18th century. The reign of James II, culminating in his abdication and exile, marked an important turning point in the history of the English monarchy and the opening of a new era. It was a time when London found itself at the center of political, social, and economic change that paved the way for a new order that would shape the city as a major political and cultural center of the world. The end of the Stuart dynasty began with the restoration of Charles II in 1660. After years of civil war, revolution and republic under Oliver Cromwell, the restoration of the monarchy was greeted in London with enthusiasm, albeit cautiously. Charles II, known for his liberal politics and love of culture, became a symbol of stability and rebirth after the turbulent years. An era of recovery began in London. The city revitalized, commerce resumed, and cultural life filled the streets once again. However, the reign of Charles II was also a time of struggle for political power, which increasingly fell into the hands of Parliament. Political tensions, especially in matters of religion, were reaching their peak. The forces that supported Protestantism were increasingly distancing themselves from the Catholic aspirations of the crown, foreshadowing a future confrontation that soon erupted in full force. James II, his brother and heir, became king in 1685. However, his reign was a disaster for the Stuarts. James II, an open Catholic, tried to bring Catholicism back to England, which led to widespread opposition among both Parliament and the people. His attempts to increase royal power and weaken the influence of Parliament met with strong opposition. London, as the center of the Protestant movement, played an important role in these protests. In 1688, James II was deposed in the Glorious Revolution, and his abdication was the turning point that finally established Parliament as the country's primary authority. This event changed not only the political landscape of England, but also led to the creation of a new order where the power of the king was limited and Parliament gained a decisive role in the governance of the state. The Glorious Revolution that ended the Stuart era marked the beginning of a new, more stable political system. London was at the center of this change, playing a key role in establishing a parliamentary monarchy. In 1689, William of Orange, who came to England at the invitation of Parliament, became King William III. This event finally established the power of Parliament and paved the way for the Bill of Rights of 1689, which limited royal powers and established new principles of government, including regular parliamentary elections and freedom from monarchical arbitrariness. The political changes brought about by the Glorious Revolution had profound consequences for London. A new sense of freedom and order swept the capital. The role of Parliament, rather than of the king as the supreme authority, strengthened the position of the merchant and bourgeois classes, which, from the 17th century onwards, became the main players in the political arena. London, as the center of these changes, became the most important symbol of parliamentary freedom, and its role in the political life of the country continued to grow. In addition, London's economic growth at this time was impressive. The expansive development of financial institutions, such as the Bank of England, which was founded in 1694, played a key role in making the city a global financial center. London became the most important hub of world trade, where money and capital circulated around the globe. In this process, the city not only became a place of wealth concentration, but also became the capital of a new era of capitalism, based on private property, financial markets, and investment. While the economy was growing, London was also becoming a cultural center. The Tudor and Stuart eras had already paved the way for a cultural renaissance, but it was in the 18th century that London became a true capital of cultural and intellectual prosperity. Since the Glorious Revolution, the city has been active in developing its literary and scientific traditions. This was the period when Richard Boyle and Jonathan Swift, as well as scientific thinkers such as Isaac Newton, made their great discoveries. London became a center for the development of science and literature, a place where ideas and forms that influenced the whole of Western civilization met. Economic growth and cultural life were closely intertwined with the development of urban infrastructure. London's landscape was changing, with more and more buildings appearing on its streets, built according to new plans, reflecting not only regeneration, but also confidence in the future. The city was becoming more organized and less chaotic. The development of streets and squares, the creation of new buildings such as the buildings on the Mall or the Royal Palace, symbolized a new era for London. The city was becoming a center of global political and economic influence. London in the late 17th century was also the site of major changes in urban life. The emergence of new layers of society, the strengthening of the bourgeoisie, and the growth of the working class were changing urban dynamics. These changes affected not only social relations, but also the image of the city. New districts, new factories and workshops, and the development of a banking infrastructure marked the beginning of industrialization, which would soon encompass not only London, but also other British cities. However, the transition to the 18th century and the end of the Stuart era did not only cement the changes that had taken place in London. These changes became the foundation for the future that led to the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, a time when London was home to great ideas and new technologies, when its role as an international capital, center of commerce and culture was becoming increasingly prominent, was the foundation for what would in the future transform London into a city that would shape the future of the whole world. London continued to grow, prosper, and set the tone for the world as it entered a new phase of its great history. The Age of Enlightenment that swept Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries had a profound impact on London, making it a major center of intellectual and cultural life. London during this period became a place where thinkers, scientists, writers, and artists met, creating an intellectual atmosphere that shaped many aspects of the development of not only the city, but the whole country. The city, traditionally an economic and political center, was now becoming a cultural center as well, where the concepts of rationalism, progress, and secularism began to actively develop, significantly changing public attitudes and structures. The Enlightenment brought to London new ideas and the pursuit of knowledge based on a scientific approach and rationalism. One of the central elements of this movement was philosophical debates and societies that sought to develop new ideas about the nature of society, politics, and the individual. London became a place where philosophers and scientists such as John Locke, Isaac Newton, and George Berkeley debated their ideas and influences on society. In these clubs, such as the Royal Society of London, the intellectual currents born during the Renaissance took on a new, more mature appearance. The establishment of institutions such as the Society of London played a key role in the dissemination of scientific knowledge. The society brought together some of the greatest minds of the time, and its influence on the development of science and technology cannot be overestimated. British scientists such as Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren studied not only astronomy and physics, but also architecture, leaving a vivid mark on the city's development. The influence of these ideas could be felt in urban architecture. Wren, for example, worked on the rebuilding of London's St. Paul's Cathedral after the Great Fire of 1666, creating a building that epitomized a new approach to urban planning and construction. The influence of Enlightenment philosophy was not only in theoretical studies, but also in the real life of the city. The ideas of rationalism and secularism gradually began to undermine the influence of the church and religious institutions, which led to the creation of new social structures and institutions. The first public libraries and museums began to appear in London, where ordinary citizens could familiarize themselves with the latest achievements in science and culture. One of such institutions was the British Museum, opened in 1759, which not only gathered unique collections, but also became a symbol of a new attitude to knowledge and culture accessible to everyone. Over time, these new ideas and institutions significantly changed the face of London. The city became not only a cultural, but also an educational center. An important step in this direction was the foundation of the University of London in 1836. Although this process began at the end of the Age of Enlightenment, the very fact that a major educational institution was established in the heart of the capital was a consequence of the changes that were leading to a growing interest in education and science. The University of London opened up opportunities for students from all over the country, and even from other parts of the world, to pursue higher education, thus providing a future for the intellectual development of England. Theaters were also an important contribution of London to the cultural life of that time. Theaters in London became not just places of entertainment, but also the most important social centers where problems of social structure, politics, and morality were discussed. The Age of Enlightenment gave birth to a new genre of theater, including comedies and satires that criticized the vices and shortcomings of society. The plays of Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope were directed against the political and social phenomena of the time, and the very publication of satirical works openly recognized the shortcomings of the rulers and aristocracy. London theaters became a meeting place for different social strata, which contributed to the democratization of cultural life. The importance of Shakespeare during this period cannot be overemphasized. Although his work and the beginning of his career belonged to an earlier time, his plays continued to be relevant well into the Age of Enlightenment. The Globe Theatre, built in 1599, became one of the most famous theaters of the time, and Shakespeare's works took on a new meaning in the context of philosophical ideas of the era. During this period, London was not only the center of political and economic life, but also the focus of cultural progress, which, along with new scientific achievements, defined the city. London also became a crucial element of the global trade network. At this time, Britain was strengthening its position on the international stage, and London found itself at the center of world trade and finance. The revival of British trade, especially with the colonies, and London's emergence as a major financial center, was a milestone in the city's history. The London Stock Exchange was founded in 1773, and in no time became the largest center for trading stocks and bonds. The city became a hub through which huge money flows passed, and this ensured not only financial prosperity, but also great influence on political processes in Europe and the world. Trade with the colonies, which flourished thanks to Britain's maritime power, became the backbone of the city's economy. The trade in slaves, spices, sugar, and cotton not only brought London wealth, but also placed it at the center of international finance. London became the link between the British colonies in the Americas, the Caribbean, and India. London's harbors were crowded with ships, and its markets with goods from all over the world. Contacts with different cultures facilitated the exchange of knowledge and broadening of horizons, which also affected the cultural and educational development of the city. While London flourished as a center of commerce, science, and culture, an equally important process was the formation of the middle class. It was a period when capitalism was on the rise, and entrepreneurial activity contributed to the creation of a new layer of citizens, merchants, bankers, artisans. It was this class that played a decisive role in the social life of the city. It became a new engine of economic growth and cultural renewal. Amidst all these changes, social problems and poverty became more and more visible. The working class migrating to London from rural areas began to face harsh living conditions in overcrowded neighborhoods. Nevertheless, changes were also taking place in this area of the city with the development of philanthropy and the first social movements. Londoners became more aware of the problems of poverty, and efforts began to improve the living conditions of the city's population, including the creation of new working-class housing estates and hospitals. Women in Enlightenment society also began to play a more prominent role, especially in the cultural and educational spheres. At this time, women became more active in literary and scientific life, publishing their work and influencing public debate. Women's literary clubs and salons sprang up in London, where not only cultural, but also social issues such as women's rights and equality were discussed. Women began to demand greater participation in public life and even played a key role in the financial and cultural growth of the city. With the onset of the Industrial Revolution, London experienced changes that made it one of the world's major centers of commerce, manufacturing, and culture. Unlike many cities of the time, London became the center not only of English industry, but also a laboratory for many of the changes that were continuously associated with the development of the New Age. The 18th century began a process that dramatically changed the urban landscape, the lives of its inhabitants, and the structure of society, which continued into the 19th century, when London finally established itself as the industrial capital of Britain. The first half of the 18th century was marked by the proliferation of factories, manufactories, and coal mines, especially around the city. Although the factories themselves began to develop somewhat later in London, mechanized factories were already beginning to appear, an important step in the creation of an industrial infrastructure. Industrial technology, such as the steam engine, began to be introduced into manufacturing, accelerating mechanization, making mass production possible. Changes in other parts of the country also began to affect London, where demand for new goods and production increased. Against this backdrop of change, the city came to epitomize the New World Order, where capitalism and industry were taking over new territories. The Thames, while remaining the most important trade artery, became a key waterway for the transportation of coal, metals, and other commodities. This provided resources for factories and manufactories, which rapidly increased production. London neighborhoods and cities that had previously been concentrated in the agrarian sector began to urbanize rapidly, becoming crucial industrial areas. Smokestacks and factory buildings became an integral part of the urban landscape. The development of transportation infrastructure played a key role in London's growth as an industrial center. The canals that were built throughout the UK allowed for the efficient transportation of raw materials and finished products. However, the most significant achievement of the time was the railroad project. The construction of railroads between London's and other regions, such as the line connecting London to Manchester, was of great importance not only to the economy, but also to further urbanization. The railways were the backbone of London's transport revolution, reducing the cost of transporting goods and providing high-speed transport. Later in the 19th century, London became the first city in the world to build a subway. The first line of the London Underground was opened in 1863. This event marked the beginning of a new era in the transportation infrastructure of the city and the whole country. Underground railroads made it possible to ease traffic in the city, reducing congestion on the streets and improving living conditions for thousands of Londoners. This rapid growth of industrialization inevitably led to an increase in the city's population. Mass migration from rural England to London and other industrial centers reached unprecedented proportions. People traveled in search of work in factories, manufactories, and other manufacturing plants. The influx of migrants led to a boom in urban development, but at the same time posed serious problems for the city. Housing shortages, overcrowded streets, poor sanitation, and lack of infrastructure. This process of urbanization was associated with a sharp increase in population density and growing social inequality. The new society that resulted from the Industrial Revolution needed new forms of housing. Apartment buildings were built in new neighborhoods for workers and their families, but living conditions in these buildings left much to be desired. Lack of water, lack of sanitation, and often poor ventilation led to the spread of epidemics and disease. Slums, such as the famous East End neighborhoods, became a symbol of the social divide between the wealthy elite and the poor working class. These living conditions created social tensions, which in turn gave rise to worker protests, strikes, and the first labor unions that began to fight for workers' rights. However, London during this period also became an important financial and trading center, epitomizing the growth of capitalism and imperialism. The London Stock Exchange continued to become the most important instrument of world trade. The largest stock and bond deals were made here, and London became the center for the international financial system. The city continued to attract capital and resources from all over the world, becoming the most important hub of world trade. Developing trade ties with the colonies, which provided Britain with commodity flows and income, only strengthened London's position as a global financial and trade center. In the early 19th century, London became the center of world trade and finance. Over time, it greatly increased its influence, becoming the most important center for importing and exporting goods. London's ports played a key role in trade with the British Empire and other countries. As trade networks developed and capital expanded, London became the most important center for ship trading companies and maritime expeditions. It was here that key decisions were made that determined the world market. The social and political changes that took place in London in the 19th century affected all aspects of urban life. The development of the working class, the movement for better working conditions, and social reforms were important milestones in the modernization of the city. New types of social assistance and charity emerged, as well as organizations concerned with occupational safety and improving living conditions for workers. This was the result of a long struggle for workers' rights, which culminated in the creation of the first trade unions and protest movements. In addition to economic changes, London also underwent a significant cultural transformation. Literature and the arts continued to develop, and new literary genres emerged against the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution. The emergence of the novel as a genre in literature, the development of new theater and genre dramaturgy, and the growing popularity of newspapers and magazines all took place in London, which continued to be the cultural capital not only of Great Britain, but of the world. Famous figures such as Charles Dickens, George Eliot, and William Thackeray made significant contributions not only to literature, but also to public debates involving issues of poverty, social displacement, and moral values. London was the stage on which events important not only to England, but also to the world unfolded. The city's theaters became a place where social issues were talked about, and famous playwrights used their talents to create works that reflected both the political and human problems of the era. These cultural transformations merged with social and economic changes, creating a unique atmosphere that shaped the face of London during the Industrial Revolution. London continued to grow, and its industrial and cultural successes remained inseparable from the struggle for a fairer society that increasingly sought progress. By the end of the 19th century, London had become one of the largest and most influential cities in the world. The age of industrialization, rapid population growth, and rapid development of technology led to the fact that this once medieval city became a megacity, reflecting all the challenges and achievements of its time. Economic growth, social change, and technological innovation made London the center of world trade, science, and culture. But it also created new social and economic problems that needed to be addressed. At the end of the 19th century, London was undergoing the process of final urbanization. The city became a huge agglomeration where factories, stores, houses, banks, and administrative offices coexisted in one place. London's population grew every year, leading to inevitable overcrowding. Despite this, London remained a center to which people from all over the world flocked in search of work and a better life. This was created not only by internal migration, but also by a large flow of immigrants. Huge numbers of people came from Ireland, Europe, and later from former British colonies. This process has brought cultural and ethnic diversity, which has not only enriched London, but also created new challenges. Racial and social divisions became visible, and ethnic enclaves formed in some parts of the city, leading to the emergence of new cultural communities and ethnic minorities. The transformation of the city has affected not only its social structure, but also its physical appearance. The construction of new buildings, urban expansion, and infrastructure improvements changed London beyond recognition. The city's architectural landscape began to fill with stately buildings and luxurious palaces, but also the first generation of skyscrapers. The construction of such gigantic structures as the London Tower, as well as numerous shopping and residential complexes, became a symbol of a new era. The growth of the city was followed by the expansion of the transportation network, which made it possible to improve connections between different parts of the metropolis. The appearance of the London Underground in 1863 was a real revolution in the transport infrastructure, and although initially it covered only a few kilometers, later, the network was significantly expanded to cover the entire city. Streetcars and buses became an integral part of the London landscape, creating accessibility and mobility for citizens. At this time, London acquired a system that could be called the first modern city, where technology and science were already actively interacting with everyday life. However, these changes have also created a number of new social problems. Population growth and urbanization led to a huge housing shortage. Workers who migrated from the countryside faced terrible living conditions. Some parts of the city, such as the East End, lacked proper sewage systems, and houses built without basic sanitation created epidemic threats. London's slums became known around the world as an example of unsettledness and poverty, despite rapid economic growth in other parts of the city. London, like other industrialized cities of the time, became the site of violent social struggles. Workers fought for their rights, demanding higher wages, better working conditions, and better housing. This led to the creation of the first trade unions, mass protests, and strikes. Events such as the Great London Protest of 1889 became landmark moments in the history of the city's labor movement. By the end of the 19th century, London had become the most important financial center of the world. The London Stock Exchange dominated the world economy, and the British pound sterling was one of the most stable and influential currencies. London became home to many major international banks and trading companies, which expanded their influence year by year. The city was not only a financial, but also a political center. Britain's influence as a world power allowed London to influence international affairs by holding diplomatic meetings and negotiations related to the British Empire. The advent of new technologies and industrialization greatly influenced the development of the economy. Steam engines, the invention of electricity, the telegraph and telephone began to enter everyday life. This contributed to the strengthening of production and the development of new industries and sectors of the economy. Factories that produced mass consumption goods, electrical equipment, machinery for transportation, and innovative industries such as chemistry and petroleum began to flourish. London became the most important center of production, and new technologies made work processes faster and more efficient. Mechanization and automation not only sped up production processes, but also began to shape people's lives and the structures of work processes. By the time industrialization reached its peak, London had already become not only the capital of commerce and finance, but also an important technological and manufacturing hub. Social change in London was associated with changes in the social structure. The emergence of a middle class based on private business, trade, and new forms of entrepreneurship was the main driver of social change. It also led to political reforms, such as electoral reforms that gradually expanded voting rights and allowed all sectors of society to participate in political life. However, the struggle for equality and better working conditions continued, especially among the working class, for whom living and working conditions remained extremely difficult. The impact of imperial wars on London was also tangible. The Great British Empire, as the largest colonial power, used its center for administrative and financial operations around the world. London's influence as a cultural and financial center strengthened its position in world politics. Culturally, London remained the most important center of art, literature, and music. The development of theaters, museums, scientific institutions, and cultural foundations greatly enhanced the city's status as a cultural capital. literature and theater became important parts of the city's life, especially against the background of social change and political transformation. Writers such as Charles Dickens, George Eliot, William Thackeray, and others became symbols of the era, reflecting the social reality and contradictions of their times in their works. London, as a place where different social strata, cultures, and ideas intermingled, became a unique arena for the discussion of world issues. It also allowed London to become a center for many international cultural and scientific movements, strengthening its position as the world's cultural capital. Thus, London in the late 19th century became not just a center of trade and politics, but also an important cultural and social hub. The modernization of the city, the development of new technologies and ideas, created a unique atmosphere that anticipated the changes that came in the 20th century. These changes set the stage for London as a metropolis ready for the next phase of its development, when the challenges of new technologies, social issues, and global politics brought new transformations to the heart of Britain. In the next part of this chapter, London enters the 20th century, entering a new phase filled with new challenges and achievements. London in the late 19th and early 20th century was a global center of finance, commerce, and politics. This period was a time of tumultuous change, as the city not only continued to consolidate its role in the global economy, but also faced internal challenges related to social reforms, population growth, and political movements. London was the most important financial center at the time. The London Stock Exchange was the largest in the world, and banks such as the Bank of England managed global capital flows. The city was the financial heart of the British Empire, and its economic power spread around the world. With each passing year, London became the most important point for trade with the colonies and other countries. At this time, the city was actively growing, the number of industrial enterprises was increasing, and London was turning into a world center of economy. Population growth was one of the most prominent factors of this time. The influx of people into London from rural areas of Britain and abroad led to massive urbanization. By 1914, the city's population exceeded 7 million, causing housing and infrastructure problems. Overcrowding and low standards of living for the poorest people caused the growth of slums. At the same time, the wealthy parts of the city remained exclusive centers of power and wealth, reinforcing social inequalities. Social and political movements in London also played an important role in the early 20th century. The working class, under conditions of industrialization, demanded better working and living conditions. Trade unions and strikes became an important tool in the struggle for workers' rights, which also influenced the social life of the city. At this time, feminist and socialist movements were actively developing in London. Women began to fight for their rights, including the right to vote, and this was a significant milestone in the social life of the city and the country. London became a place for the first public actions aimed at improving the status of women and the working class. Externally, London remained a continuation of the greatness of the British Empire. The city was the political center of the country, and its role in world politics was undeniable. London became a meeting place for world leaders and diplomatic negotiations, maintaining ties with colonies and foreign countries. The British Empire continued its dominant course, and London remained its nerve center, through which the most important economic and political decisions passed. When the First World War broke out, London, like the rest of the country, found itself in the epicenter of the world conflict. During the war, the city became an important military base and supply center. All factories and plants were put on a war footing, and the production of weapons, shells, and supplies became a priority. London faced economic difficulties due to the shift to war production, as well as increasing shortages of goods. Residents of the city experienced restrictions on consumption, and a ration card system was introduced. Many of the city's wealthy neighborhoods were destroyed by bombing, and their residents were evacuated. The social changes caused by the war were also significant. Loss of lives, returning soldiers, destruction, and psychological trauma left their mark on London. The war changed not only the external appearance of the city, but also its internal structure. The massive loss of men between the ages of 18 and 40 has led to changes in social and working life. Women, previously restricted in their roles, now took up jobs in factories, offices, and laboratories, replacing men. This, in turn, paved the way for the subsequent expansion of women's rights and participation in political and social life. In addition, the war led to massive population movements within the country. As new workers and refugees from other parts of the UK arrived in London, the city also became an important evacuation point. Bombs and shells destroyed not only buildings, but also the usual pattern of urban life. In the midst of this instability, there was a gradual shift in public consciousness. London became a place where not only global issues were addressed, but also issues of social justice. From the beginning of the 20th century, London went through a period of social change, consolidating its role as a center of labor and cultural interaction. Social struggles, the growing influence of the working class, and the role of women in change all shaped the atmosphere of the city. Industrialization and urbanization, intensified by the world wars, led to a new perception of London as a city undergoing processes of social and cultural transformation. Issues of equality, class distinctions, and human rights became relevant to the city's citizens. London was no longer just a place where economic and political decisions took place, but a reflection of global changes in society and culture. The interwar period was a time of significant economic and social change for London, which was still recovering from the devastation of the First World War. The country was experiencing severe economic problems, including inflation, high unemployment, and social instability. At the same time, London, remaining the key financial and commercial center of Great Britain, continued to seek ways to recover and adapt to the new conditions of the post-war world. The British economy in the 1920s was in deep crisis. Inflation provoked by war spending and the heavy consequences of the war, such as the rebuilding of destroyed infrastructure and the demobilization of the army, led to rising unemployment. London, as the economic capital of the country, was at the center of this crisis. Despite this, the city took a number of steps to rebuild its economy. Much attention was paid to the reconstruction of war-damaged areas and the construction of new residential and commercial buildings. Outwardly, London was full of construction sites, and new neighborhoods grew like mushrooms. Associated with this process was a significant modernization of the city's infrastructure. New roads, bridges, and buildings reflected London's desire for renewal and progress. One of the key factors contributing to the recovery was the strengthening of the financial sector. London continued to be the world's financial center. Capital flows into the country increased in the 1920s, and with the emergence of new banks and financial institutions, London maintained its influence in the international economy. British banks such as Barclays and Lloyds and the London Stock Exchange remained major players in the global financial system. During this time, the city continued to attract international trading companies that used London as a bridge between Europe, America, and its colonies. London remained an important center for global trade networks, and its influence extended to all corners of the globe. However, alongside economic hardship and recovery, London faced social and cultural changes that would not have been possible without the post-war transformation. The social strata of the city began to change markedly. The emergence of new types of jobs in the city's economy led to the growth of the middle class. Meanwhile, thanks to mass migration, London's ethnic landscape also began to change. People coming from the British Empire brought new ideas and culture to the city. Migrants from the Caribbean, India, and Africa created diverse communities, and this in turn influenced the development of London as a cultural and multicultural center. As ethnic diversity increased, the city became an example of multiculturalism, which also influenced its social structure. At the same time, London became a real center of cultural life. Mass culture was in its heyday. Cinema and radio became important elements of everyday life in the city. London's theaters, clubs, and concert halls were full of spectators and listeners, and cultural events became an integral part of the city's routine. Cinema, which had become popular at the beginning of the century, became even more widespread throughout the 1920s, and London became an important center for the development of the film industry. Films such as those produced at studios in the West End attracted audiences from all over the world. With the development of mass culture, it was also not without the emergence of new arts, such as Art Deco, jazz, and modernism. London during this period was a place where these movements were actively developing, and urban life was increasingly reflected in the arts. Modernism in architecture and design created new images of the city, and jazz, first introduced from the United States, quickly gained popularity on London's dance floors and clubs. It was also a time of great social change in fashion. London became the world capital of fashion shows, and local designers gained international recognition. Cult British brands such as Savile Row and other ateliers created styles that became the benchmark. Political changes also played a significant role in the life of the city. London became a place where political and social reforms were actively debated. In the 1920s, after the Great War, there were significant shifts in Britain. Socialist ideas became increasingly popular, and London became an arena for political debate. At this time, the influence of the Labour Party grew, and a movement for social reform and the betterment of the working class grew. London became an important political center where new programs for social justice and workers' rights were being developed. On the eve of World War II, London also found itself at the center of political tensions that were sweeping across Europe. A time of world wars and economic crises had London preparing for possible conflict. There was growing political anxiety caused by the rise of fascist and communist movements in Europe, as well as the instability that accompanied the world economy. Domestic political changes also foreshadowed future transformations in British politics and society. London met World War II with political and economic instability, and soon found itself at the center of the fighting. With the outbreak of war in 1939, London became the main target of German bombing raids, which went down in history as the Blitz, intense air attacks that lasted almost the entire winter of 1940 to 1941. London was a strategic target for German aviation, and during these years, the city experienced destruction on an unprecedented scale. The bombing of London was an integral part of the war, as German forces tried to weaken Britain by destroying its industry and the morale of the population. London was subjected to regular airstrikes, and many parts of the city were virtually destroyed. Streets, houses, buildings were all destroyed or damaged, and many people were killed in the attacks. Under these circumstances, a mass evacuation of citizens from the most affected areas began. However, despite the devastation, London remained important as the political and economic center of Britain. The royal family, the government, and key public offices remained here, making the city even more vulnerable to German bombing. London, despite the serious destruction, continued to live. The people of the city showed courage and resilience, kept their jobs, and continued to struggle with the consequences of the war. With goods and products in short supply, black markets sprang up where people looked for any means to obtain food, clothing, and other necessities. It was also a time of incredible social cohesion. People supported each other, helped rebuild cities, and remained committed to defeating fascism. Women who occupied important positions in the war industry and in working factories played a key role in supporting the country's economy. On the one hand, they produced weapons and shells, and on the other hand, they worked as nurses and volunteers to help evacuate and care for the injured. Their labor became a symbol of women's resilience and commitment to victory. Nevertheless, food shortages were a serious problem. The war led to the introduction of the card system, and Londoners received limited rations of food and goods. Cards for bread, meat, milk, and other goods became an everyday reality. People became accustomed to economy and ingenuity. often replacing missing food with local produce grown in the city's vegetable gardens or using artificial substitutes. Food shortages, constant power outages, and damaged communications affected the daily lives of city dwellers, but it also reinforced a sense of common purpose and teamwork to achieve victory. Under the conditions of the war, London not only remained the most important economic and political center, but also became a key point for anti-fascist resistance. The British authorities, despite the hardships, continued to resist the growing pressure from Nazi Germany. Numerous anti-fascist groups operated in London, as well as volunteers and defenders ready to stand to the end. Cooperation with allies such as the US and USSR strengthened Britain's position, and London played a crucial role in organizing military operations, creating strategies, and making key decisions. The impact of the war on urban life was multi-layered. The sudden air raids and bombings, the destruction of infrastructure, the loss of loved ones, and the uncertainty surrounding the future led to profound psychological changes. But despite the harsh conditions, there was a sense of unwavering determination in London. The strategic importance of the city demanded unparalleled courage and dedication from its inhabitants. The city, despite the widespread destruction, did not lose heart. On the contrary, it became even more united and victory-oriented. After the end of the Second World War, London found itself in a situation where it was necessary to rebuild not only its physical structure, but also its social and cultural fabric. Destroyed neighborhoods began to be rebuilt at a new pace. Housing reconstruction programs were some of the first steps towards normalization of life. The mass construction of housing estates, the rebuilding of damaged factories and plants, and the creation of jobs became the main priorities of London's post-war economy. It was a time of massive transformation, which also concerned the transportation system. Renewal of the city's infrastructure included reconstruction of roads, restoration of bridges, and modernization of urban transport. In addition, post-war London became a symbol of post-war hope and change. The country's economy began to recover, and the role of the state in managing the economy increased. Social reforms began in the country, which led to the creation of a social system that provided minimum standards for all citizens. London became a place where a new generation grew up that was connected to ideas of social equality, justice, and collective responsibility. Reconstruction and social reforms allowed the city and its people to emerge from the shadow of war with new goals and hopes for the future. After the Second World War, London, like the rest of the UK, found itself in a difficult economic situation. The war-damaged infrastructure, social and political problems required rapid recovery. However, despite the heavy legacy of the war, London in the post-war years began to recover and turn into one of the world's largest financial and cultural centers. London's economy experienced a rapid recovery in the post-war period, with a major emphasis on the financial sector. Banking flourished in the city, and London once again became a major international center of trade and finance. The London Stock Exchange continued to be one of the largest in the world, and new financial institutions strengthened the city's position on the world stage. At the same time, London's financial sector became closely linked to global markets, which contributed to the city's economic integration into the world economy. London continued to be the capital of international financial transactions, and its influence on the global economy remained unconquered. Nevertheless, the economic recovery has not been without problems. One of the most pressing problems was housing. There was a severe housing shortage in London in the post-war period, and millions of people lived in destroyed houses or in poorly equipped temporary accommodation. To solve the problem, the country began building reforms aimed at creating new housing estates. During the 1950s and 1960s, residential neighborhoods, including mass housing for the working class, were actively built, reducing poverty and improving living conditions for many Londoners. Despite these efforts, however, problems with housing and urbanization persisted throughout the post-war period. Social transformation was also an important part of post-war London. The growing middle class, with its new consumer behavior and demands, largely shaped the political and economic life of the city. London became an arena for the growth of the equality, women's rights, and working-class movements. The Labour Party, which gained popularity, promoted the introduction of large-scale social reforms aimed at improving the living conditions of citizens, increasing the level of education and social protection. One of the most significant steps was the creation of the National Health Service, NHS, in 1948, which provided free access to medical services for all British citizens, including Londoners. With the transition to a cultural renaissance, London also experienced a number of significant changes. The city once again became the most important center of not only economic, but also cultural life in Europe. The architectural changes taking place in London had a profound effect on its appearance. After the devastation suffered during the war, the city was significantly rebuilt, and new buildings, neighborhoods, and industrial facilities were part of the post-war reconstruction. The construction of modern housing estates, office buildings, and cultural facilities made London one of the symbols of European modernization. London also remained an important cultural and educational center of Europe. The London School of Economics, one of the world's leading educational institutions, attracted students from all over the world and played an important role in the development of international economic and political relations. In addition, the city was home to some of the most prestigious art galleries and theaters, which supported its reputation as a cultural center. Theater, music, film, and the arts continued to flourish, and London became increasingly attractive to global talent, becoming the stage for major cultural events. Migration has also played a key role in changing the structure of the city. After World War II, London became the new home for a huge number of migrants, primarily from former British colonies. People from India, the Caribbean, Pakistan, and other countries of the British Empire came to London in search of work and a better life. This led to the rise of multiculturalism in the city. London became a place with unique ethnic diversity, which affected the social and cultural life of the city. The new immigrant groups not only strengthened London's economy, but also enriched its culture, bringing new traditions, art, music, and cuisine. Migration became an important factor in transforming London into a melting pot, where different cultures coexist, influence each other, and create a new common space. At the same time, important political changes were taking place in London. Electoral reform, which had begun before the war, continued to develop. The influence of labor movements, feminist initiatives, and youth protests was growing. These political changes and social protests led to the growing influence of the Labour Party and the expansion of democratic rights and freedoms. London continued to be the most important political center of Britain and at the same time played an important role in global politics. As a financial and cultural center, London influenced international relations, becoming a diplomatic hub for crucial negotiations and meetings. London at the end of the 20th century was a city of enormous change. Recovery from World War II, economic and social reforms, growing cultural diversity, and political transformation made London one of the world's most influential capitals. These changes foreshadowed the even more profound changes London experienced in the 21st century, when it became not only a cultural and financial center, but also a place of new challenges and opportunities for the whole world. In the 21st century, London continues to be one of the world's leading global centers, but the city faces new challenges and changes that require it not only to adapt, but also to innovate. Over time, London has consolidated its role as the financial, cultural, and political hub of the world. But amidst global change, it faces issues related to security, sustainability, and social justice. One of the most tragic events in the history of London in the 21st century was the terrorist attacks of July 7, 2005. A series of explosions that took place in the Moscow subway also affected London. These terrorist attacks, carried out during rush hour on London trains and buses, killed 52 people and injured more than 700. They left an indelible mark on the history of the city and the world, demonstrating the vulnerability of even the largest and most developed megacities. The impact of these events on public consciousness was enormous. London became more wary and prepared for possible threats. In response to the terrorist attacks, security measures in public transportation, subway stations, and other public places were strengthened. The city has undergone profound psychological changes, but has retained its spirit and its determination not to give up in the face of threats. Another major event of the 21st century that significantly shaped London was the 2012 Olympic Games. London became the third city in history to host the Summer Olympics for the third time, and this milestone has become a symbol of a city that has overcome all challenges and difficulties. The 2012 Olympics not only captured the world's attention, but also had a significant impact on the city's infrastructure. Many new facilities were built: the Olympic Park, the London 2012 Stadium, the swimming arena, and the cycling track. The most important achievement was the reforms in transport infrastructure. Subway lines were modernized, new rail routes were created, and conditions for pedestrians and cyclists were improved. The Olympics also provided an impetus for the development of East London, which had previously been underdeveloped, allowing entire neighborhoods to be reborn and given a new lease of life. However, in the 21st century, London faces a number of major challenges, one of which is climate change. The city is actively combating the effects of global warming by taking measures to improve the sustainability of the urban environment. London was one of the first major metropolitan areas to implement policies to combat climate change, including reducing carbon emissions, improving air quality, and introducing energy-efficient technologies. The construction of green buildings, the development of public transportation, and the creation of parks and green spaces are all measures aimed at sustainable development and improving the quality of life of citizens. Nevertheless, climate change issues remain relevant. Against the backdrop of global warming, London continues to work on minimizing flood risk and improving environmental safety. Another challenge for the city is social inequality and affordable housing. In recent decades, London has become one of the most expensive cities in the world, and housing problems remain one of the most acute. Property prices continue to rise, while demand for affordable housing among young people and low-income families is increasing. City officials are taking measures to address this problem, including affordable housing programs and initiatives to demolish old and dilapidated houses to build new housing complexes. However, social inequality, the division into rich and poor neighborhoods, remains a serious problem that threatens the social stability of the city. Despite these challenges, London remains the cultural center of the world. The city continues to influence fashion, art, and technology as a leading center of innovation and cultural trends. London fashion has always been considered the benchmark, and designers such as Victoria Beckham, John Galliano, and Alexander McQueen continue to be iconic figures in the global industry. London's museums, such as the British Museum and the National Gallery, continue to be essential cultural centers, attracting millions of tourists each year. In addition, London continues to grow in technology, becoming an important center for startups, especially in the areas of fintech and artificial intelligence. Modern technologies not only influence the daily lives of Londoners, but also make the city a leader in the global innovation process. At the end of the 20th century, London has undergone significant changes and continues to evolve, facing new challenges and opportunities. As the world's financial, cultural, and political center, it remains an important point of intersection of various global processes and trends. In the 21st century, London will continue its role as a global leader, actively addressing issues of sustainability, social justice, and cultural exchange. The story of London is a tale of overcoming adversity, adaptation, and growth. From Roman Londinium to global metropolis, London has never stopped changing, maintaining its uniqueness and importance to the world. Century after century, the city has experienced war, revolution, social and cultural change, each time finding new ways to thrive. A look at London's future shows that the city will continue to play a central role in global politics, economy, and culture. London will work to be not only a financial and cultural hub, but also a city that values sustainable development and social equality. It is important that the city continues to care for its historical heritage, preserving the monuments of the past and synthesizing them with innovative solutions that will help it move into the future. London's future is one in which history and modernity intertwine, setting the stage for a new century and a new generation of Londoners.